English Podcast Hub. Hey everyone, welcome back to English Podcast Hub. I'm Mia, and I'm here with Mark. So Mark, I got an email this morning that honestly made me stop everything I was doing because it hit me right in the heart. Can I read it to you?
Of course. What did it say?
It's from a listener named Ahmed, and he writes, Mia, I've been learning English for 8 years. My grammar test scores are perfect. I can write essays that my teachers praise. But last week, I went to a coffee shop and tried to make small talk with the barista, and I sounded like I was giving a presentation at the United Nations. She looked at me like I was a robot. I said things like, I would appreciate it if you could recommend a beverage, instead of just, what's good here? I'm so embarrassed. How do I stop sounding like a walking textbook?
Oh man, I feel this so deeply. You know what? This is the struggle that I think almost every language learner goes through at some point, and it's brutal because you're doing everything right on paper, but in real life, you just feel completely out of place.
Exactly. And Ahmed, if you're listening, first of all, thank you for being so honest, because I guarantee you that hundreds of people listening right now are nodding their heads going, that's me. That's literally me. And here's the thing, this isn't your fault. This is actually a side effect of how most of us are taught English.
Right, because textbooks and formal classes focus so much on grammatical accuracy and proper structure that they accidentally train you to sound like you're writing an email to your boss every time you open your mouth, even when you're just chatting with friends or ordering coffee.
Yes, and the crazy part is that native speakers break grammar rules all the time in casual conversation. We use incomplete sentences, we say gonna instead of going to, we start sentences with and or but. We use slang that would make English teachers cringe. But that's what makes us sound natural and human.
Okay, so before we dive deeper, I have to tell you a story because this topic is so personal to me. When I was learning Spanish, and I'm not gonna lie, my Spanish was terrible for years, I had this moment that still makes me laugh and cringe at the same time.
Oh no, what happened?
So I was in Mexico, right? And I'd been studying Spanish very seriously, doing all my grammar exercises, memorizing conjugations like my life depended on it. I felt pretty confident. And I met this group of locals at a bar, and they were so friendly and welcoming, and I thought, this is it. This is my moment to shine.
Oh boy, I can already tell this is going somewhere.
So they're all chatting and laughing, and I'm trying to join in, and I'm using all this formal vocabulary I learned from my textbook. At one point, I wanted to say, that's so funny, but instead I said something like, eso es sumamente gracioso, which is technically correct, but sounds like something a 19th century aristocrat would say. And everyone just stopped and looked at me. And one guy goes, dude, relax, we're not in a job interview.
Oh no, but you know what? I love that story because it's so relatable. And the fact that you can laugh about it now shows growth, you know?
Exactly. And that moment was actually a turning point for me because I realized I was putting up this wall between myself and real connection by trying too hard to be correct. I was missing the forest for the trees, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. You were so focused on not making mistakes that you forgot the actual purpose of language, which is connection and communication, not perfection. And I think that's the key insight here. Textbook English is designed to teach you the rules, but real conversational English is about breaking those rules in specific, predictable ways.
Yes, and I want to pause here for a second and ask our listeners something. Have you ever had a moment like Ahmed's or like mine where you realized you sounded way too formal or stiff in a casual situation? If yes, just drop a comment below saying been there, because I think it's important for everyone to see they're not alone in this.
Great idea, because honestly, this is one of those things where you think you're the only one struggling with it, but it's actually universal. Every single learner goes through this phase. Now, let's talk about why textbook English sounds so different from real English. What's actually happening here?
Well, I think the first thing is that textbooks prioritize clarity and correctness over naturalness. They want to make sure you understand the structure, so they use very complete, proper sentences. But in real life, native speakers cut corners all the time because we're trying to communicate efficiently, not demonstrate perfect grammar.
Right. And there's actually a linguistic term for this. It's called reduced forms. In casual speech, we reduce and compress language. I am going to go becomes I'm gonna go. Do you want to grab some food becomes want to grab some food. These aren't sloppy mistakes. They're actually how fluent speakers naturally talk.
Exactly. And this connects to something really important about contractions. In textbooks, contractions are often presented as optional or informal variations, But in real spoken English, if you're not using contractions, you sound incredibly stiff.
Yes, like if someone says, I do not know what I am going to do, instead of, I don't know what I'm going to do, it sounds like they're either angry, being sarcastic, or they're a robot learning to experience human emotions for the first time.
That's such a good way to put it. To be honest, I think one of the fastest ways to sound more natural is just to start using contractions in every single sentence where they're possible. It's such a small change, but it makes a massive difference.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole issue of vocabulary choice. Textbooks tend to teach you very neutral, formal vocabulary because it's safe and appropriate in most contexts. But in casual conversation, native speakers use much more colorful, informal language.
Right, like Ahmed's example of saying, I would appreciate it if you could recommend a beverage instead of what's good here. The first one sounds like he's negotiating a business contract, not ordering coffee.
Exactly. And you know what? This reminds me of a phrase we use in English, beating around the bush. It means you're avoiding saying something directly. You're being too indirect and wordy. And that's exactly what happens when you use textbook English in casual situations. You're beating around the bush when you should just get to the point.
I love that idiom, and it's so true. Native speakers in casual settings tend to be much more direct and simple than textbooks teach you to be. We say, Can I get a coffee? Not, May I request a coffee beverage, please? We say, I'm starving, not, I am experiencing significant hunger.
Yes. And here's another thing that textbooks don't really prepare you for filler words and phrases. Like, like, I mean, so, well, actually. These are everywhere in natural speech, but textbooks treat them like they're bad habits to avoid.
Oh man, this is huge because if you listen to any native speaker having a casual conversation, these fillers are constant. They're not signs of poor English, they're actually signs of fluent, natural speech. They give you time to think, they soften your statements, they make you sound conversational rather than rehearsed.
Exactly. Like, I mean, if you listen to us right now, we're using these fillers all the time, you know? It's just how real people talk. And when learners try to eliminate all fillers and pauses from their speech, they end up sounding really unnatural and overly prepared.
Right, it's like they're performing rather than conversing. And actually, I want to ask our listeners another question here because we're about halfway through and I'm curious. What's the most textbook sounding phrase you've ever caught yourself saying? Drop it in the comments. I bet we'll get some hilarious ones.
Oh, I love that question. I want to see those answers. Okay, so we've talked about contractions, reduced forms, vocabulary choice, and fillers. What else makes someone sound like a textbook?
I think a big one is sentence structure. Textbooks teach you to use very complete, grammatically perfect sentences. But in real conversation, people use fragments. They start sentences and change direction halfway through. They use and to connect ideas loosely. They interrupt themselves.
Yes, real conversation is messy in a way that textbooks never show you. It's not clean and linear. It's full of false starts and corrections and tangents, and that messiness is actually what makes it feel human and authentic.
Absolutely. And this is where I think the psychological piece comes in, because I think a lot of learners know intellectually that they need to sound more casual, but emotionally, they're terrified of making mistakes or sounding uneducated.
Oh, this is so important. Can we dig into this? Because I think this fear is at the root of why people cling to textbook English, even when they know it sounds unnatural. What's happening psychologically here?
Well, I think when you've spent years being graded on grammatical correctness, your brain starts to associate correct English with good English and successful English. So when someone tells you to be less formal, to use contractions, to break grammar rules, it feels dangerous, like you're going to sound stupid or uneducated.
Right, because in school, if you wrote gonna or wanna in an essay, you'd probably lose points. So your brain has been trained to see informal English as wrong English, even though in casual conversation, informal English is actually the right choice.
Exactly. And there's this other thing too, which is that for a lot of learners, especially those who are shy or introverted, speaking formally feels safer because it creates a kind of emotional distance. If you sound like a textbook, you're hiding behind proper language, and it feels less vulnerable than being casual and personal.
Wow, that's such a profound point. So it's almost like a defense mechanism? Using formal language as a way to protect yourself from feeling too exposed or judged?
I think so, yeah. And I get it because learning a language puts you in this really vulnerable position where you're basically going back to being a child in some ways, making mistakes, not always knowing the right words. And using very proper formal language can feel like a way to maintain some dignity and control in that uncomfortable situation.
That makes so much sense. But the irony is that by trying to protect yourself with formal language, you actually create more distance and make it harder to connect with people,
which is the whole point of learning the language in the first place.
Exactly. It's like you're solving the wrong problem. You're optimizing for sounding educated when you should be optimizing for connecting with humans. And this is where we get into another idiom. You're putting the cart before the horse. You're prioritizing something that should come second over what should come first.
Perfect idiom. And you know what? I think this is a good moment to address something that might be worrying some of our listeners. They might be thinking, okay, but if I start being too casual, won't I sound disrespectful or unprofessional? Won't people think I don't know proper English?
That's a really important concern to address. And the answer is that there's a time and place for everything. You absolutely should use more formal English in professional settings, job interviews, academic writing, presentations, things like that. But in casual, social situations, chatting with friends, making small talk, ordering food, talking to classmates, formal English creates weird distance.
Right, it's about code switching. You adjust your level of formality based on the situation and the relationship. And the good news is that once you learn how to be casual in English, you can always dress it up for formal situations. But if you only know formal English, it's really hard to dress it down without sounding awkward.
That's such a good way to put it. And honestly, native speakers are pretty good at sensing when someone is trying too hard to sound proper, and it can come across as either insecure or like you're trying to show off, neither of which is what you want.
Exactly. And I think this connects to another psychological barrier, which is perfectionism. A lot of learners have this idea that they need to wait until their English is perfect before they can start being casual and natural. But it doesn't work that way.
Right. You don't become casual after you become perfect. You become casual by practicing being casual, which means accepting that you're going to make mistakes and sound awkward sometimes. And that's totally okay and part of the process.
Yes, and actually, I want to share an idiom here that I think captures this perfectly. Practice makes perfect. It means you don't get good at something by waiting until you're ready. You get good by doing it over and over, even when you're not ready, even when you're bad at it.
I love that. And speaking of practice, let's talk about some concrete, practical things people can do to stop sounding like a textbook and start sounding more natural. What's the first step?
I think the first and easiest step is what we already mentioned. Start using contractions everywhere. Every time you're about to say I am, stop yourself and say I'm. Every time you're about to say going to, say gonna. This is such a small change, but it immediately makes you sound more conversational.
Yes, and related to that, start using reduced forms in your speech. Want to becomes wanna, have to becomes have to, got to becomes gotta. These aren't mistakes, they're how native speakers actually pronounce these combinations in fast, casual speech.
Absolutely. And the second thing I'd recommend is to actively listen to casual English and pay attention to how it's different from what you learned in textbooks. Watch YouTube videos, watch TV shows, listen to podcasts where people are just talking naturally, not reading from a script.
Right, and when you're watching or listening, don't just focus on understanding the meaning. Pay attention to the little things, the fillers, the incomplete sentences, the slang, the idioms. Notice how real people actually structure their thoughts when they're speaking spontaneously.
Yes, and then try to imitate it. This might feel weird at first, like you're doing an impression or being fake, but you're actually just learning the natural patterns of casual speech. It's no different from how children learn to talk by imitating the adults around them.
Great point. And here's another practical tip. Learn some common casual phrases and expressions that replace formal ones. Instead of I apologize, say my bad or sorry about that. Instead of that is very impressive, say that's awesome or that's sick, depending on your age and the context.
Yes, and instead of I am uncertain, say I'm not sure, or even just I don't know. These little substitutions make a huge difference in how natural you sound. And before we go any further, I want to check in with our listeners one more time. What's your biggest fear about being more casual in English? Like, what's stopping you from just relaxing and talking more naturally? Let us know in the comments because I think talking about these fears is really important.
That's a great question. And you know what? I think one fear that we haven't fully addressed is the fear of being misunderstood. People worry that if they're too casual or use too much slang, native speakers won't understand them.
That's a valid concern, but here's the thing. Native speakers are actually really good at understanding different levels of casualness because we use different levels ourselves depending on who we're talking to. As long as you're using real English words and phrases, not making them up, people will understand you.
Right. And actually, being too formal is more likely to create confusion than being too casual. Because when you use really formal language in a casual setting, people don't know how to read you. They might think you're angry or being sarcastic when you're just trying to be polite.
That's such a good point. Okay, so let's talk about another practical strategy. Learn to use filler words deliberately and strategically. Start adding like, you know, I mean, and well into your sentences to make them sound more conversational.
Yes, but I want to add a caveat here. Use them naturally, not excessively. You know what I mean? Like, if you overdo it, you'll sound like a Valley Girl stereotype from a 90s movie. But if you sprinkle them in naturally, they make you sound fluent and comfortable.
Perfect advice. And here's another thing that can help. Learn some common idioms and phrasal verbs that native speakers use all the time in casual conversation. We've already mentioned a few today, like beating around the bush, putting the cart before the horse, and practice makes perfect.
Right. And there's one more I want to throw in here that's really relevant to this topic: breaking the ice. It means making people feel comfortable in a social situation, starting a conversation in a friendly way. And the irony is that if you're speaking like a textbook, you're not breaking the ice, you're creating ice.
I love that. That's such a perfect way to describe it. And you know what? Learning idioms serves a double purpose. First, it makes you sound more native-like because idioms are everywhere in casual English. But second, and this is really important, it actually helps you think in English rather than translating from your native language.
Oh, that's a really important point. Because when you're translating in your head, you're more likely to use formal textbook structures. But when you're thinking directly in English, using English idioms and expressions, your speech naturally becomes more casual and authentic.
Exactly. And this brings us to maybe the most important piece of advice we can give, which is to change your goal. Instead of trying to speak perfect English, try to speak comfortable English. Instead of asking yourself, is this grammatically correct? Ask yourself, would a native speaker say this in this situation?
Yes, and I want to emphasize that this doesn't mean giving up on grammar or accuracy. It just means recognizing that there are different types of English for different situations, and casual conversation has its own rules that are different from written English or formal speech.
Absolutely. And here's the empowering truth that I want everyone to take away from this conversation. You already have all the tools you need to sound natural. You don't need to learn a bunch of new grammar or vocabulary. You just need permission to be more casual, more human, more yourself.
That's so well said, because I think a lot of learners are carrying around this weight of, I need to be more, I need to learn more, I need to be better. But actually, you need to be less formal, less rigid, less afraid of making mistakes. You need to give yourself permission to just talk like a regular person, having a regular conversation.
Yes, and Ahmed, if you're still listening, I want you to know that the fact that you can write perfectly and use formal English correctly is actually a huge advantage. You've proven that you understand the language. Now you just need to relax and let yourself play with it, bend it, make it yours.
Exactly. And to everyone listening, I want you to do something for me this week. I want you to have one conversation in English where you deliberately try to be casual. Use contractions, use filler words, use simple vocabulary, use idioms if you know any. Just try it and see how it feels.
I love that challenge. And here's what I think you'll discover. It actually feels liberating to stop trying to be perfect and just focus on connecting with another person. That's what language is for. It's not a test you're trying to pass. It's a bridge you're building between yourself and other humans.
Beautifully said. And remember, every native speaker started as a baby making nonsense sounds. We all went through a phase of sounding silly and making mistakes. That's how language works. You don't need to skip that phase. You just need to embrace it and move through it.
Exactly. So stop treating English like a museum where you have to be quiet and careful. Treat it like a playground where you can run around and experiment and sometimes fall down, and that's totally okay because that's how you learn and grow.
I love that metaphor. All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening to Easy English Conversation. Remember, stop sounding like a textbook and start sounding like yourself. You've got this.
Yes, give yourself permission to be casual, to be human, to be imperfect. That's where real fluency lives. See you next time.